Set in a world on the brink of transformation, New Arc Line is a story-driven RPG that immerses players in a realm where magic and technology are clashing in this relentless struggle for dominance. Something you notice right away from the start as the game opens with the remnants of a city blasted by some horrible disaster. It also has one of the worst names ever. It sounds like the name of a publisher with a spotty track record for microtransaction games. All that aside, it's actually coming from Ukrainian studio Dreamgate, and I decided to take it for a spin, especially as it's got enough vibes from games that I like that I thought it was worth checking out. In New Arc Line, everything is happening after the magic technology wars, where science and engineering have triumphed over magic, or at least done so enough that magic is more of an undercurrent at the start. If it looks like Pillars of Eternity or Baldur's Gate and maybe a bit of Arcanum, you'd be right. Because all those games and more have influenced the developers in a lot of ways, and you're going to see that here. Now, the world is a weird one. It's a weird history, even. Technologists riding the waves of industrialization have risen to power, relegating magic and their users to an almost second-class citizenship, with sorcerers and enchanters overshadowed by engineers and scientists. The battle itself has been going on through the ages, each with their own massive problems when it comes to the groups. For example, magic users could become specially powerful, respected mages by creating things called miracles, but each one of those ended up destroying a bit of the reality each time. So each group has its positives and negatives. While of course the other side has its own issue, the story's lodged firmly in the grips of a great upheaval here. The seas are ruled by steamboats, the skies are dominated by zeppelins, and the tools of war are no longer wands and staves, but guns, grenades, and automatons, built for everything from sweeping up the blood and bandages of illegal street fights and being used as secondary firepower for criminals bent on pulling off Cops TV show levels of crime. The game opens with you making a character, choosing two races currently, elf and humans, each offering their own basic statistics. Also, kudos to the devs, as the character models actually look pretty good compared to a lot of the early access games that I've played. You have the typical choices of tattoos, facial setup, currently more of a set of templates, and then hair and beards and all that. And then you dive into the careers available for early access, which are currently two. Both offer the ability to pick from a named trait, and think of that as sort of a bucket of skills wrapped up in a title. Scholars, for example, are educated in the old ways, some of it useless, but with a ton of intellectual power to bring to bear, but a bit weak in the knees because not many priests are doing friggin' drop set squats. Outsiders are people who've come out of a magic rift and no one really knows who they are or why they're there. They've got magic in their blood. Then you have renegade cultists. This one is interesting. It's a background where you created and flourished a hidden evil cult, but then at some point in your life decided to escape and try to make up for the error of your ways. You also can be a guild spy. These are, well, ex-guild spies actually, taking on the mantle of desired change with the skills that they've got from being a spy. For example, deception, sleight of hand, and so on. You also have Soul Survivor. This is a bit of an odd one. Your family's been killed from the original society's upheaval, and yet some of the cities still know your name, and it has some power, and I'm sure some enemies, using skills like persuasion or charm or other skills. After that, you add some points to your main statistics that are pretty much D&D statistics you see everywhere, strength, dexterity, that kind of thing, as well as adding specialties that are both passive and active. Need to move a crashed car, you can try to find a key somewhere, or you can try to figure out why the brakes are seized up, or you can use one of these specialties to check against the difficulty of seeing what the issue is. It's a cool little mashup, even when you look at early access not offering a great deal. There's enough here that you can certainly make 2 or 3 or 4 even distinct characters, and that of course doesn't include those that will join you on your trip. Now, after choosing the character, the main game does start. During a catastrophe, this massive dragon has apparently destroyed the city, and you wake up wearing nothing but what looks like a hospital robe with some mysterious symbol on it, and you explore. As you talk to each denizen, you realize somehow you have caused it. Exploring the small area first, you start to piece together the absolute destruction that has just occurred here. Characters lament dying family members, others scream at you in hatred, and more in a dire state of deep shock as the mysterious steampunk magical items around the world are floating around broken from their original machines. Luckily, it's like 5 minutes because it is pretty boring in this location, especially because you're hurt through all of it, so you're dragging your broken ass around, talking to different characters and seeing this destruction you've made. After a bit of traipsing around, though, you move to a cutscene where you start to get the idea of what's happened. This powerful judge explains to you the error of your ways, and then it jumps a couple months back. I think the big question is, after early access, are they going to be able to pull it all together? Because any kind of game, story, or movie that shows you a bit of the ending at the starting has a very, difficult road ahead of them. And that road opens up to the first location that you go into. You arrive on a set of docks and you have to get into the city and meet somebody for your main quest. It's here where you learn that you've just arrived. You need to check in. You have to have your first real interaction with another character. You take on small quests, mostly the lost some random shit, or I need to find some random shit, or you just found random shit kind of variety. Perhaps the most interesting part here is that almost instantly, the writing goes places I did not expect. For example, you find out pretty quickly that your second character, this massive brawling fisticuffs fighter, is also a rampant drug user. And it's not just within the basic narrative as some kind of one-liner. Many characters in the game indicate that they've dealt or been dealing with him in some illicit way. It's actually far headier than I expect. The same goes for some of the other writing. While it's not exactly structured in a super complex way, it's the different elements of the narrative that creates that complexity. The different ways in which the characters are talking about not only the overall worldview, but just bits where all of the parts come together in ways you didn't expect. A little extra reach that we see in a narrative playing out in the gameplay. For example, another excellent change here is that the consistent narrative battle of that magic versus tech that pops up, it's not only the character types that you choose, but also ends up playing out in the gameplay. If you sway a region towards magic or tech during discussions and quests, that region will be more useful and powerful in that changing of power for you in attacks and battle. It's a phenomenal way of merging quests and narrative and combat and ultimately warping all the parts together. It doesn't mean it always works, but I love that they're going for that. That also means that the writing needs to nail it, and that's something I'll talk about a little bit more in the fun factor. But let's talk about combat for a second. Combat runs on an initiative system with each character taking turns and having action points for specific actions. So far, nothing incredibly new or special here, and it works exactly as you would expect. Though movement isn't on a grid-based system, it's just a line system, more like a miniatures tabletop game using a ruler. You get to test it out here and there, a fight on the wharf, a couple random folks who get pissy when you pilfer their property, and checking on occasional locations where a random monster will pop out, like a bedbug being carried across state lines. It's an easy to grasp system though, so far. In the early access, I haven't seen anything that either makes me hate it or love it. Just a solid system with you having action points to move and fire and reload, as well as specialties, both passive and active. Like your second character, you can get him using a massive weapon. It's a giant hammer, and you can do the expected hammer stuff, like stun or absolutely pound someone like they're a strength test at a punching bag machine. Of course, you have your items, your weapons, your armor that you can upgrade and switch around, with some characters only able to use some stuff depending on their class. But you also do many other things in this game. For example, when you fail some checks, you get a second chance using a magical tarot card that you draw from that seems seemingly random at first, and you apply it to your second try at that roll. It's a little bit disjointed right now, but you start to see what they're trying to do. Sort of overlay the magic with the steampunk at pretty much any time and make sure that it's not all separated. As well as a pickpocketing minigame that has you using up points based on your skills to move around the various pockets of a victim, with items uncovered costing a certain number of movement points as well as grabbing them. And that has you moving through it, spending points, trying to figure out how far you can get through somebody's pockets to grab different items. It's a damned good minigame, especially as with luck, even a bad pickpocket skill might actually allow for you to get something, and pushing your luck, even if you're a master thief, could get you caught. It also means it's not just a one-click affair. I like that. It's a lot of systems and narratives going on, and that can bring some complexity. But honestly, that complexity and mixing is refreshing to me. Also refreshing is to see a game like this early access from a team you really haven't heard of that doesn't look half bad graphically, especially after the first part of the game where you're forced to trudge around, as I said, due to some kind of mysterious injury. Here, it looks amazing. Right when you land on the wharf, it is a phenomenal looking game. It has almost refreshing amount of world building, even in the first locations. You got policemen taking in new entries to the city, and as you sign in, you can see all kinds of characters moving around in the background of various different races. There's clutter around items to tons of characters. Little graphical embellishments like your party members carrying a portable tech automaton on their back, like Master Blaster from Mad Max, and being able to craft weapons, armor, and explosives right there in the town square just doesn't seem suspicious at all, because it works in the way this game plays out. Presentation is also where the game's feeling of BioShock Infinite come into play, where everything looks bright and cheery, festival bits festooned around locations, but everywhere you look, something feels a little bit off. There's a feeling, an undercurrent you see in the animations and between groups that feeds back into the narrative. Performance right now is a little bit on the low side. It has a number of options, including various upscalings, and while the 4090 didn't need to crank it to get to above 80 FPS for the most part, the 2080 did, even at a lower resolution. Sort of the typical expectations of Unreal Engine pop up here as well, but I've actually seen reports of people with much worse performance. Some glitches are here. For example, there's a bug here that, weirdly enough, if you turn off the frame rate lock, the game delivers a very low FPS, or reports it as that. If you lock it at, say, 144, the FPS skyrockets despite no locks, VSync, or any other settings that really would make this perform in this way. It's an anomaly that I assume they will fix, or perhaps there's some kind of difference in the way they're trying to explain it in their options, and maybe they just need to explain it better. But normally, when you would turn a max FPS off, you would get as many FPS as you can. That's actually not what happens here, and I'm wondering if a lot of people who are having issues see that. Also, shadows do take a tremendous toll on the game, especially in some of the absolutely cluttered areas that you go to. Technological inventions are turning and twisting, steam pipes are going off, you see all kinds of effects, and that can definitely hit your FPS. Overall, I'd say most of the time it's good, with a couple weaknesses here or there. The art design and the way they present it just works for me. And while they don't have the exact polish as something like Baldur's Gate, it is early access. Other than the aforementioned lower FPS that I said, not bad. I did have one bug where my character's female hair was transparent in layers when I chose that character, but it seemed to appear and come and go. It just depended on where I was in the game. Let's talk about the audio for a second. First, the music cracks in this game, no lie. If that's even a small representation of the music that we're going to get throughout the final game, sign me up. Not once, but twice. Kinda has a low beats per second epic sounding feel to it that reminds you almost of Imperial marches, but there's just something to the way it plays. When the destruction happens and you jump into a battle, I will wonder if, over time, that's going to get boring, because the more epic a couple tracks are, the more they are noticeable and rememberable. We'll just have to see. Rememberable is not a word. Memorable. Also, voices are okay. Currently, some characters are voiced and others aren't. Some characters seem to have voices that fit them, others don't. This is one of the places where I think we see this in a lot of games, where the voices just don't always fit because, hey, you got to find English speakers for your Ukrainian developer, and you have to make sure that everybody understands the inflection of characters' moments and movements in a game that sometimes change from the time that they recorded it to the time you see it actually in the game. There's a judge character I talked to who sounds suitably like a giant piece of shit. I did want to hold their head underwater for a small amount of time, like 10 minutes, because damn, they were an asshole. When it comes to the sound, this is not bad at all. Exploring the initial docks area, you have the sound of water and the hush of big locations, various ground effects that are going on, as well as diegetic moments like small bands playing music on the side street that fades out the main music so you can listen to whatever jingle they're playing. Everything has a solid sound to it. So far, no real glitches or problems that I experienced throughout my time. How does it all come together, though? And does it come together at all? Not everything is great here. First, while the character has some very unique ideas as to does the world, I can see kinds of people who are like, I've already had a character who's a big bruiser kind of dude in another game and wants every single part of a new game to be original. This probably won't be for you. There's also not as much overall content as, say, Baldur's Gate 3 Opening Island, but not all games can be that. Also, controls were a bit finicky here, with no real ability to use ASW to move around the game world. For whatever reason, the game said you could do it, and I could not get it to work, no matter what options I turned on or off. Even in battles, it usually didn't work. There was one time where it just suddenly started working, then it stopped again. Also, the camera has an annoying tendency to move back and forth. Also, to me, when you look at this game, the starting area is a good idea, but I really do think having that character hurt slows the overall presentation a good deal. That being said, it's a war of magic versus technology. I play a lot of RPGs in the typical isometric vein, and I can count on just one hand maybe on how many worlds really interest me from the very start, the world itself. Arcanum, Tyranny, and only a couple others. However, the mix of magic and tech and the overlap of the narrative impacting the battle and the gameplay and the characters absolutely has me interested in what is occurring here. I found myself wanting to know every slang word or diving into different terms in conversations, which is rare for me, where sometimes clicking one more narrative choice seems like a checklist named be bored just a bit more. While Arcanum had that back and forth between technology and magic of the worldview within the character, here, the outward-facing elements and the idea of altering a location's overall emotional resonance with either magic or technology to raise or lower the usefulness of it was highly interesting, but we'll need to see more. Your mileage and enjoyment will be directly tied into both the unique worldview and if you feel early access is something you want to engage in, which is a hard choice these days with so many titles not delivering or using early access like a paid-for beta test program. Also, there are some claims that the dev used AI for character shots in the game, the actual character portraits. Steam requires a tag for that now, and it's not tagged on the game that I could see. From what I saw, it didn't really look like that. It is a specific caricature when it comes to a lot of the art, but overall, I couldn't see that it was AI. I also didn't zoom in on it 800%. If they didn't do it, Steam will have to sort that out. The game's length was about 9 hours for the early access, but I didn't fight every single bastard who was holed up in the city waiting for me and my pals to traipse by either. I also didn't check what every single skill, which there are a bunch, and how they all worked for every single narrative. But I did play it enough to say, quite enjoyable. Peace out, subscribe, or comment, otherwise I'll die.